"I ain't white, sir, but I can cook," the trembling girl declared to the giant rancher, her voice cutting through the dusty silence as townspeople gathered to witness what they assumed would be her final humiliation. The frontier had no mercy for wandering souls like her, a young woman with nothing but a cast-iron skillet and desperate hope, marked by skin that made her unwelcome in every establishment she'd approached. They whispered she'd be dead or gone by winter, another casualty of a world that crushed the defenseless. But the towering cowboy studying her wasn't like the others, scarred by his own losses, wealthy yet hollow. He possessed the power to change everything or destroy what little remained of her spirit. Hidden in her worn satchel lay a sealed letter that could transform her from beggar to landowner, but only if she could survive long enough to claim what was rightfully hers. Would his decision grant her the chance she desperately needed, or would prejudice seal her doom forever? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The dust of Cedar Ridge swirled around Clarissa Mayhew's worn boots as she clutched the cast-iron skillet closer to her chest. 3 days without a proper meal had left her lightheaded, but she forced herself to walk with purpose down the main street. Whispers followed her like vultures. She had traveled from Louisiana with nothing but memories of yellow fever taking everyone she loved. Her grandmother's recipes lived in her mind, but recipes couldn't buy shelter or silence the cruel stares that tracked her every movement. The bakery door slammed in her face before she could finish asking about work. The hotel owner looked through her like she was invisible. At Murphy's restaurant, the proprietor didn't even let her speak. "We don't need your kind here," he said, returning to his customers. Clarissa's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Behind the livery stable, she found a dry corner where the wind couldn't reach. The ground was hard, but she'd slept on worse. She pulled her thin shawl tighter and tried to ignore the gnawing hunger in her stomach. Morning brought no relief. The sealed letter in her satchel seemed to mock her with its weight. She'd carried it from Louisiana, too afraid to open it, too superstitious to throw it away. Her uncle's lawyer had pressed it into her hands with urgent eyes, but grief had made her numb to everything except survival. The general store buzzed with activity as ranch hands loaded supplies. Clarissa watched from across the street, studying their easy camaraderie. One man stood apart from the rest, his massive frame casting shadows over the others. Even at a distance, she could see the authority in his posture, the way other men deferred to his quiet presence. James Jackson owned the largest spread in 3 counties. Everyone knew his story: wife and child lost to cholera. Wealth that couldn't fill the emptiness. He rarely came to town himself, preferring to send his foreman on errands. Today was different. Clarissa forced herself across the street. Her heart hammered against her ribs. But desperation made her brave. The giant rancher looked down at her with eyes the color of storm clouds. Up close, she could see the lines grief had carved into his weathered face. "I ain't white, sir, but I can cook." The words tumbled out before fear could stop them. Around them, conversations died. The ranch hands stared. A woman loading her wagon stopped to gawk. Jake studied her for a long moment. "That so?" "Yes, sir. My grandmother taught me. She could feed 50 people with scraps and make them beg for more." Something flickered in his expression. "When did you last eat?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "That's not important, sir. I'm looking for honest work." He gestured toward the restaurant where she'd been turned away. "Try Murphy's." "Already did. They're not hiring." The lie came easily. No point explaining the real reason for her rejection. Jake's foreman, a lean man with kind eyes, stepped closer. Elias Vander had served in the Buffalo Soldiers before finding work on the ranch. He recognized struggle when he saw it. "Boss," Elias said quietly, "roundup starts next week. Cookie's getting too old for trail cooking." Jake's jaw tightened. Making decisions about strangers wasn't his nature anymore. 3 years of grief had taught him that caring led to loss. But something about the girl's straight spine and steady voice cut through his defenses. "You got references?" Clarissa's hand moved to the letter in her satchel. "Not exactly, sir. But if you give me a chance, I'll prove what I can do." The banker, Whitmore, emerged from his office across the street, his eyes fixed on Clarissa with uncomfortable intensity. She'd noticed him watching her yesterday, whispering with well-dressed strangers who didn't belong in Cedar Ridge. "Jackson," Whitmore called out. "Didn't expect to see you in town today." Jake nodded curtly. "Business." Whitmore's gaze shifted to Clarissa. "This young lady been asking a lot of questions around town, about property and such." The comment hung in the air like a threat. Clarissa felt the weight of every stare, heard the renewed whispers. In a town where newcomers were viewed with suspicion, Whitmore's words painted her as a schemer. "Is that right?" Jake's voice revealed nothing. Clarissa lifted her chin. "I haven't asked anyone about property, sir. Only about work." Whitmore smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. My mistake." The banker retreated, leaving tension thick as summer heat. Jake studied Clarissa with new interest. Whatever game Whitmore was playing, he didn't like it. "My ranch is 10 miles north," Jake said finally. "Sunrise to sunset. 7 days a week during roundup. Pay is fair, but the work isn't easy." Relief nearly buckled her knees. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." "We'll see about that." As Jake's men finished loading supplies, Clarissa allowed herself to hope. She still hadn't opened the letter, still didn't know what secrets it contained. But for the first time since leaving Louisiana, she had somewhere to go. The sealed envelope crackled against her fingers as she climbed into the supply wagon. Whatever truth it held would have to wait. Right now she had work to do and a chance to prove her worth. The ranch stretched toward the horizon, promising either salvation or another kind of heartbreak. The sealed letter felt heavier with each passing hour. Clarissa had worked 3 days at the ranch, transforming simple provisions into meals that made hardened cowboys lick their plates clean. But the envelope in her satchel whispered secrets she wasn't ready to face. Jake's ranch house stood like a monument to loneliness. Dust covered every surface. The kitchen held remnants of a woman's touch, but grief had let neglect creep into every corner. Clarissa cleaned as she cooked, bringing life back to rooms that had forgotten warmth. She found a photograph on the mantel. A beautiful woman holding a baby, both smiling at the camera. Sarah Jackson and her son, frozen in happier times. Clarissa understood loss. Yellow fever had taken her parents, her siblings, everyone except the grandmother who raised her until pneumonia claimed her too. The ranch hands treated her with careful respect. Word had spread about her cooking, but more importantly, they saw how Jake looked at her, not with desire or possession, but with something rarer, recognition. Elias found her crying over the morning biscuits on her 4th day. The tears fell silently, years of grief finally finding release in the safety of Jake's kitchen. "Letters can be fearsome things," he said gently. Clarissa wiped her eyes. "How did you know?" "Carried one myself for 2 years after the war. Sometimes the unknown feels safer than the truth." She pulled the envelope from her apron pocket. The lawyer's seal remained unbroken, the paper soft from handling. Her uncle's name was written in careful script across the front, a man she'd never met but who'd apparently remembered her existence. "My uncle died 3 months ago." The lawyer said this was important, but everything felt important then. Too important to think about. Elias poured coffee into 2 cups. "What changed?" "I can't keep running from everything that scares me." Her hands shook as she broke the seal. The legal document inside made no sense at first. Too many formal words wrapped around a simple truth that stole her breath. She owned land, a small homestead on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, left to her by an uncle who'd never married, never had children of his own. 20 acres with a cabin, a well, and grazing rights that could support a modest living. But the gift came with chains. She had 6 months to prove the land could turn a profit, or ownership would revert to the bank. The letter was dated 4 months ago. Time was bleeding away like water through cupped hands. "Sweet mercy," she whispered. Jake appeared in the doorway, drawn by her voice. He read the document over her shoulder, his presence solid and reassuring. You know this land? He asked. Rode past it yesterday checking fence lines. Good water source, decent soil. Cabin needs work, but it's salvageable. Clarissa felt the world spinning. Yesterday she'd been a homeless cook, grateful for steady work. Today she was a landowner facing an impossible deadline. Why didn't Whitmore tell me when I first came to town? Jake's expression darkened. Good question. They rode to the homestead that afternoon. The cabin sagged under years of neglect, but Clarissa could see past the decay to its potential. The well ran clear and deep. Wildflowers dotted the meadow where cattle could graze. It was beautiful. It was hers. It was slipping away. 2 months, Jake said, reading her thoughts. Not much time to prove profitability. I don't know the first thing about ranching or farming. In Louisiana, I cooked for other people's success. Never built my own. Jake studied the land with a rancher's eye. This place has good bones. With the right help, it could work. Hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. What kind of help? Partnership. You cook for my roundup crew, I help you get this place running. Fair trade. The offer seemed too generous. Clarissa had learned to be suspicious of unexpected kindness, but Jake's face held no deception. Why would you do that? He was quiet for a long moment. Been a while since I had reason to build something instead of just maintaining what's already here. They shook hands on the deal as the sun set over her inherited land. Clarissa felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of fear that had gripped her since Louisiana. But driving back to the ranch, she noticed fresh wheel tracks near the cabin. Someone had been watching the property recently. The tracks were too narrow for ranch wagons, too deep for casual visitors. That night, she dreamed of her grandmother's hands kneading bread dough, strong and sure and capable of feeding anyone who came hungry to her door. She woke with new resolve and the memory of her grandmother's voice. Child, you got everything you need right here in your hands. Don't let nobody convince you otherwise. Jake found her in the kitchen before dawn, already starting breakfast for the crew. Sleep well? He asked. Better than I have in months. Thank you for the offer yesterday. I accept. He nodded, pouring coffee. We start with the basics. Fencing, clearing brush, maybe a kitchen garden. Small steps. Small steps, she agreed. Neither of them saw the rider watching from the ridge above the ranch, or noticed how he turned toward town when the first light touched the horizon. Some secrets took time to surface, and Cedar Ridge held more than its share. Clarissa had her land and her chance. Now she needed to learn what forces were working against both. Jake's ranch house had forgotten what home felt like until Clarissa arrived. She moved through rooms like a gentle storm, sweeping away dust and silence with equal determination. The kitchen became her kingdom, filled with aromas that made grown men stop work just to breathe deeply. Her talent revealed itself in layers. First came the practical magic of stretching provisions into plenty. Beans and bacon became feasts. Tough cuts of meat surrendered to her patient hands, transforming into tender meals that satisfied souls as much as stomachs. But her true gift emerged when young Tommy Rodriguez collapsed with fever. The newest ranch hand, barely 18, burned with sickness that had the other men backing away in fear. Too many had seen fever take strong men in days. Clarissa didn't hesitate. She moved Tommy into the main house, set up a makeshift sick room, and began the careful work of nursing him back to health. Her grandmother's voice guided every decision. Cool cloths for the fever, broth to keep strength flowing, patience when medicine demanded it. Learn this during the outbreak, she told Jake, who hovered nearby. Yellow fever took my family, but Grandmama saved dozens of others. Said cooking and healing came from the same place. Love made into action. She worked through 3 days and nights, catching sleep in the chair beside Tommy's bed. Jake watched her gentle competence, saw how she held hope steady when everyone else expected death. The boy's fever broke on the 4th morning, leaving him weak but alive. Word spread through the county faster than wildfire. The new cook at the Jackson place had healing hands. Ranch wives began finding excuses to visit, bringing small ailments and large curiosities. Clarissa treated both with equal grace. Jake found himself watching her more than was proper. The way she hummed while kneading bread, how she saved kitchen scraps for the barn cats, the quiet strength in her voice when she told stories of her grandmother's wisdom. She was beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with features. Beautiful in the way sunrise was beautiful, necessary and warm and impossible to ignore. "You're staring again," Elias said one evening as they watched Clarissa hang laundry. Jake turned back to the ledger books. "Don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't. When's the last time you thought about Sarah?" The question should have stung. Instead, Jake realized the constant ache in his chest had softened to something bearable. Sarah would always hold part of his heart, but hearts could grow larger when love demanded space. "She'd like Clarissa," he said finally. That she would. Work on Clarissa's homestead progressed slowly. They repaired the cabin roof, cleared brush from the meadow, and mended the worst gaps in the property fence. But time moved faster than progress, and the bank's deadline loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Worse, someone was working against them. Jake discovered cut fence lines twice in 1 week. Fresh hoof prints appeared near the cabin whenever Clarissa wasn't there. Small acts of sabotage that felt deliberate but proved nothing. "Who benefits if you lose the land?" Jake asked one evening as they walked the property boundaries. "I don't know. It's just a small homestead." But Jake's rancher instincts said otherwise. The land sat perfectly positioned between town and the railroad survey markers he'd noticed lately. Someone wanted Clarissa to fail, and they had reasons beyond simple prejudice. Elias shared his suspicions over coffee the next morning. "Whitmore's been meeting with strangers, well-dressed men with city manners and surveying equipment." "Railroad men?" "That'd be my guess. And your lady's land sits right where a smart man would put a junction." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Clarissa wasn't just fighting time and inexperience. She was fighting a rigged game designed to steal her inheritance. Jake's anger burned cold and purposeful. He'd seen enough good people crushed by powerful interests. Not this time. Not her. They were sitting on the cabin porch at sunset when Clarissa finally spoke the truth hanging between them. "I know I'm not like your Sarah. I'm not delicate or refined. But working beside you these past weeks has been the happiest I've ever been." Jake's throat tightened. "Sarah was sunshine and laughter. You're something different. Something I didn't know I needed." "What's that?" "Strength. The quiet kind that holds everything together." She looked at her hands, work-roughened and capable. "Grandmama used to say we all got different gifts. Some folks are meant to bloom pretty in parlors. Others are meant to grow strong in storms. Which are you?" "Still finding out." He took her hand, feeling the calluses that proved her worth. "I'd like to find out with you, if you'll have me." Her smile could have lit the darkest night. "I'd like that too." But their moment of peace shattered the next morning. Someone had poisoned her vegetable garden during the night, killing every plant she'd carefully tended. The message was clear: give up or face escalation. Clarissa stood among the dying plants, tears mixing with rage on her face. But she didn't break. Instead, she squared her shoulders with the determination Jake had come to love. "They want a fight," she said. "They'll get one." The Harvest Festival was 3 weeks away. The cooking competition offered prize money that could save her land. More importantly, it offered a public stage where truth could finally defeat lies. They had work to do. The Harvest Festival announcement appeared on every storefront in Cedar Ridge like a declaration of war. The cooking competition promised a $100 prize to the winner, enough money to transform Clarissa's struggling homestead into something profitable. More importantly, it offered a stage where the whole county would witness her talents. Clarissa studied the poster outside Murphy's restaurant with calculating eyes. 3 established cooks had already entered. Mrs. Henderson, who'd won the last 2 years with her apple pies. Martha Wills, whose Sunday roasts drew families from neighboring towns. And surprisingly, Darla Simmons, whose reputation for gossip exceeded her kitchen skills by a considerable margin. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Jake asked, reading the poster over her shoulder. Depends on what you think I'm thinking. That this is your chance to prove what you can do in front of everyone who's ever doubted you. She nodded slowly. And win enough money to save the land. But entering meant more than just cooking. It meant standing in the town square while hundreds of people judged not just her food, but her right to belong in Cedar Ridge. The thought made her stomach twist with nerves. Elias found them that afternoon at the homestead, where Jake was teaching Clarissa to repair fence posts. His expression carried the weight of bad news. "Found out who's been causing your troubles," he said without preamble. Clarissa straightened, hammer still in her hand. "Who? Better question is why." "Jake, remember those railroad survey stakes we've been seeing?" Jake's jaw tightened. "What about them? They're not just mapping a route, they're mapping a junction right here." Elias gestured to encompass Clarissa's entire property. "This land isn't just valuable for farming. It's the key piece for a railroad hub that could be worth thousands." The implications hit Clarissa like a physical blow. "That's why someone wants me to fail." "Whitmore's been meeting with railroad investors twice a week. They need your land, but they need it cheap. A failed homestead sells for pennies on the dollar." Jake's hands clenched into fists. The sabotage, the poisoned garden, all of it. "Gets worse," Elias continued. "Word is they're not planning to wait for the bank deadline. They want you gone before the festival." Fear and fury warred in Clarissa's chest. She'd found a home, found love, found purpose, and now faceless men in expensive suits wanted to steal it all for profit. "Let them try," she said quietly. That night they planned like generals preparing for battle. The festival was 10 days away. Clarissa would enter the competition with her grandmother's secret gumbo recipe, the one that had sustained her family through the worst of times. But winning the prize money was only part of their strategy. "We exposed them publicly," Jake said. "During the festival, when everyone's gathered. Hard to deny evidence when the whole county's watching." Elias had been collecting proof for weeks. Photographs of the survey stakes, records of Whitmore's meetings, even a partial transcript of conversations overheard at the bank. Circumstantial, but damning when assembled together. "Problem is timing," Elias said. "They know about the festival. Might make their move before then." As if summoned by his words, riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the homestead. 3 men in city clothes. Watching with the patience of vultures, they made no threatening moves, just sat their horses and observed. "Intimidation," Jake said. "They want you scared." Clarissa studied the distant figures with steady eyes. "Then they don't know me very well." She spent the next week perfecting her grandmother's recipe, adjusting seasoning and technique until every element sang in harmony. The gumbo required precise timing, expensive ingredients, and skills passed down through generations. It was her heritage made edible, her love transformed into sustenance. But the watchers never left. Different men, same purpose. They tracked her movements, noted her preparations, waited for weakness that never came. 2 nights before the festival, they made their move. Clarissa woke to the smell of smoke, not the warm scent of her cooking fire, but the acrid stench of burning destruction. She ran outside to find her small barn engulfed in flames, along with winter hay that had cost precious dollars. Jake and Elias arrived within minutes, but the building was already lost. They fought the fire to keep it from spreading, but the damage was complete. Months of preparation reduced to ash and ember. "Insurance won't cover this," Whitmore said, appearing with suspicious speed. "Shame about accidental fires." Nothing accidental about it, but proving arson meant proving motive, and that circle led back to Whitmore himself. "Still planning to enter the competition?" he asked with false sympathy. Clarissa stood amid the smoking ruins, soot on her face and determination in her spine. Wouldn't miss it. The morning of the festival dawned clear and bright. Clarissa loaded her ingredients into Jake's wagon with hands that barely trembled. She'd lost the barn, lost the hay, lost her safety margin for surviving the winter, but she still had her skills, her recipes, and her reasons for fighting. The town square buzzed with excitement. Cooking stations lined the main street. Each competitor allocated space for preparation and presentation. Judges sat at prominent tables, ready to sample and evaluate each entry. Clarissa began her gumbo as crowds gathered to watch. The familiar rhythm of cooking calmed her nerves. Each step a meditation passed down through generations of strong women who'd survived worse than railroad conspiracies. The secret would reveal itself soon enough. The Harvest Festival transformed Cedar Ridge into something magical. Colored ribbons fluttered from every post. Children ran between booths clutching penny candy, and the air thrummed with excitement that made even hardened ranchers smile. But beneath the celebration, tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Clarissa's cooking station drew curious crowds from the moment she began her preparations. Her movements held the confidence of generations, each gesture precise and purposeful. She started with the roux, that crucial foundation that could make or break the entire dish. Dark as coffee, smooth as silk, stirred with patience that couldn't be rushed. At the neighboring station, Mrs. Henderson worked on her prize-winning apple pies with mechanical efficiency. Martha Wills prepared her famous roast with practiced ease. Darla Simmons struggled with what appeared to be an overly ambitious beef stew, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. But all eyes kept returning to Clarissa's station, drawn by aromas that seemed to tell stories of distant places and deeper traditions. Jake positioned himself at the edge of the square with Elias, both men scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Whitmore stood near the judges' table, exchanging quiet words with well-dressed strangers who didn't belong at a small-town harvest festival. Railroad men, without doubt, here to witness their plan's success. "You ready for this?" Elias asked, checking the manila envelope tucked inside his jacket. "Been ready," Jake replied, his eyes never leaving Clarissa. She added ingredients to her gumbo with the rhythm of a prayer. Andouille sausage that she'd special ordered from Louisiana. Fresh shrimp that had traveled packed in ice. Okra and tomatoes that had survived her poisoned garden. Each element joined the dance, building flavors that transcended simple cooking. The secret ingredient came last, a small bottle of seasoning that had belonged to her grandmother, passed down from a woman who'd learned to make magic from scraps and determination. Clarissa measured it with reverence, knowing this was likely the last time she'd use her inheritance of spices. "What's she cooking over there?" someone in the crowd whispered. "Smells like heaven," came the reply. The judges began their rounds, tasting and deliberating at each station. Mrs. Henderson's pies earned appreciative nods. Martha's roast drew genuine compliments. Darla's stew received polite smiles that said everything about its mediocrity. Then they reached Clarissa's station. The first judge, Mayor Collins, approached with visible skepticism. He accepted the bowl with reluctance, expecting little from the newcomer who'd caused such gossip in recent months. The first spoonful changed his expression entirely. His eyes widened, then closed in something approaching reverence. "Good Lord," he murmured. The second judge, Dr. Matthews, showed similar transformation. The third, Mrs. Patterson, who ran the Church Ladies' Auxiliary, actually gasped aloud. One by one, they tasted Clarissa's gumbo and found themselves speechless in the face of perfection. Word spread through the crowd like wildfire. People pressed forward, desperate to catch the aromas that promised flavors beyond their experience. Clarissa served small samples to anyone who asked, watching faces transform with each taste. But her true audience was the man approaching the judges' table with determined strides. Jake stepped into the center of the square as the competition concluded, Elias flanking him with the manila envelope held high. The crowd sensed drama and gathered closer, festival atmosphere shifting to something more serious. Before the judges announced their decision, Jake called out, his voice carrying across the square, "Folks need to hear some truth about what's been happening in our town." Whitmore started forward, alarm flashing across his face. "This isn't the time or place for—" "It's exactly the time," Jake interrupted. "When the whole county's gathered and paying attention." Elias opened the envelope, revealing photographs and documents that painted an undeniable picture. Survey maps showing railroad junction plans, bank records documenting suspicious meetings, even photographs of the men who'd been watching Clarissa's property. Miss Mayhew's land isn't just a small homestead, Jake announced. It's the key piece for a railroad junction worth thousands of dollars, and certain folks have been trying to steal it through sabotage and intimidation. The crowd murmured, pieces clicking together in minds that had dismissed the strange occurrences as coincidence. The poisoned garden, the barn fire, the mysterious watchers, all of it suddenly made terrible sense. Whitmore tried to bluster his way through denial, but evidence spoke louder than excuses. The well-dressed strangers melted away into the crowd, abandoning their local conspirator to face consequences alone. Railroad companies could weather scandal better than small-town bankers. The law will sort out criminal charges, Jake continued. But right now, this community needs to decide what kind of place Cedar Ridge wants to be. The kind that protects people like Miss Mayhew, or the kind that lets greed and prejudice destroy good folks trying to build honest lives. The judges, clearly shaken by revelations that cast their competition in new light, conferred briefly before Mayor Collins stepped forward. In light of today's events, and based on the most exceptional culinary display this town has ever witnessed, the winner of this year's Harvest Festival cooking competition is Miss Clarissa Mayhew. The crowd erupted. Not polite applause, but genuine celebration from people who'd tasted her cooking and heard her story. Clarissa accepted the prize money with hands that shook only slightly, the $100 representing more than financial security. It represented acceptance, belonging, and the foundation for dreams she'd almost lost. But the sweetest victory came when Darla Simmons approached her station, humble embarrassment replacing her usual sharp tongue. "I owe you an apology," Darla said quietly. "I listened to gossip instead of getting to know you. That recipe of yours, would you maybe teach me sometime?" Clarissa smiled, grace flowing easier than expected. "I'd be honored to." 6 months after the Harvest Festival, Clarissa's homestead hummed with activity that would have seemed impossible during those desperate early days. The prize money had purchased lumber for a new barn, seeds for expanded gardens, and equipment that transformed her small property into something remarkable. But the real transformation went deeper than buildings and crops. The morning sun streamed through windows of what had become Cedar Ridge's most sought-after restaurant. Clarissa's kitchen occupied the front room of her rebuilt cabin, expanded with Jake's help into a dining space that seated 20 people comfortably. Every table was full by noon most days, filled with folks who came not just for the food, but for the warmth that seemed to radiate from every corner. Clarissa moved through her domain with quiet confidence. Her grandmother's cast-iron skillet now displayed proudly above the fireplace. She'd traded desperation for purpose, uncertainty for belonging, and the change showed in everything from her posture to her smile. Jake found her in the kitchen that morning, preparing for what would be their last day as unmarried people. Tomorrow's wedding had the whole county talking, not with gossip this time, but with genuine celebration for two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances. "Nervous?" he asked, watching her knead bread with familiar competence. "Should I be?" "Most folks are, day before their wedding." She considered this, flour dusting her hands as she worked. "I'm not most folks." He laughed, the sound rich and easy. 3 years of grief had lifted from his shoulders like morning fog, replaced by something brighter. "No, you're not." The bread went into the oven with practiced timing. Clarissa had learned to run her restaurant like clockwork, every dish emerging at precisely the right moment to maintain the steady stream of satisfied customers who kept her small business thriving. Elias appeared in the doorway, grinning broadly. He'd used his savings to purchase the plot adjacent to Clarissa's land, building a modest house where he planned to raise horses and maybe find himself a wife who could tolerate his quiet ways. "Railroad company came through with the final settlement check," he announced, waving an envelope. "Fair compensation for junction rights, just like the lawyers promised." The scandal had cost Whitmore his position and reputation, but it had also brought honest negotiations with the railroad investors. Clarissa's land was indeed perfect for a junction, and once forced to deal fairly, the company had offered generous terms that let her keep ownership while profiting from their use. "How much?" Jake asked. "Enough to expand the restaurant." Buy that breeding stock you've been wanting and still have plenty left over. Clarissa sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the magnitude of change. A year ago, she'd owned nothing but a skillet and desperate hope. Now she had land, business, love, and financial security that seemed too good to believe. "You crying?" Jake asked, concerned. "Happy tears," she managed. "Grandmama always said good things come to those who keep stirring the pot, even when it seems empty." The afternoon brought a steady stream of wedding preparations, disguised as normal business. Darla Simmons arrived with arms full of wildflowers, her transformation from gossip to friend one of the festival's most unexpected outcomes. She'd become Clarissa's most enthusiastic student, learning not just recipes, but the patience and love that made them special. "These are for tomorrow's tables," Darla announced, arranging flowers with surprising skill. "And I finished the cake this morning. Used that spice blend you taught me." Dr. Matthews stopped by with his wife, ostensibly for lunch, but really to wish Clarissa well. He'd become her most vocal supporter after witnessing her nursing skills during an influenza outbreak that winter. Half the town owed their health to her combination of medical knowledge and kitchen wisdom. "Heard talk about expanding into a proper hotel," he said over his usual bowl of gumbo. "Just talk for now," Clarissa replied, "but Jake thinks we could build guest rooms upstairs, serve travelers on the railroad route." Smart business sense. "This place has become the heart of Cedar Ridge whether folks realize it or not." He was right. Clarissa's kitchen had become more than a restaurant. It was where deals were negotiated, friendships formed, and community built over shared meals that nourished souls as much as bodies. Evening brought quiet moments alone with Jake on the porch they'd built facing the sunset. Tomorrow would bring ceremony and celebration, but tonight belonged to reflection on the journey that had brought them here. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, taking her hand. "About what?" "Leaving Louisiana. Coming to a place that didn't welcome you at first." She thought about her grandmother's voice, still clear in memory after all these months. About the cast iron skillet that had carried her through the darkest times. About the recipes that had become bridges between her past and future. Grandmama used to say we all got seeds inside us, but some ground's better for growing than others. Louisiana was where I learned to cook. Cedar Ridge is where I learned to live. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant in the clear desert sky. Tomorrow would bring new chapters, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that worth came from character rather than circumstance. But tonight, surrounded by the sounds of her thriving homestead and the warmth of love freely given and received, Clarissa Mayhew knew she'd found exactly where she belonged. The cast iron skillet would hang in place of honor, ready for the next generation to learn that with courage, skill, and the willingness to keep stirring even when times seemed impossible, any recipe could become extraordinary.